I adjusted my tie in the hallway mirror, wondering why I had to feel like the one being inspected tonight. Allison stood behind me, smoothing the sleeves of her emerald green dress, watching me with that mixture of expectation and subtle disappointment she reserved for family events. "Please, Daniel," she said, "just try tonight. No lectures about offshore accounts or Ponzi schemes. Just be normal." That word again. Normal. We were headed to her mother's house in Wauwatosa, a colonial-style brick home that always smelled like scented candles and pretentiousness. Caroline, the matriarch of curated social circles and subtle condescension, was throwing this dinner for Brooke, Allison's younger sister, to show off her latest romantic achievement, Chase Whitman. The name already sounded like a yacht. And from what I'd heard, the man fit the part, some kind of private equity executive with a Porsche, Italian suits, and enough confidence to make everyone forget to ask real questions. Caroline was smitten, apparently. Allison too, if I was being honest. As we drove through the icy streets, I could already feel the weight of the evening settling into my chest. I wasn't expected to talk. I was expected to nod, smile, and play along. "It's just dinner," Allison had said. But dinners in that house were never just dinners. They were tests, unspoken competitions where jobs were measured by the price of your watch and the relevance of your latest vacation photos. When we walked in, Caroline greeted us with air kisses and a smile so tight it could snap. "Daniel, so good to see you. You clean up nicely," she said, her tone more surprised than complimentary. "Chase is already here. We've been talking stocks in Europe, such a fascinating man." I forced a polite smile and let her guide us into the dining room, where Brooke was practically glowing, her hand possessively looped around the man of the hour. Chase Whitman looked exactly how I expected. Mid-30s, perfect tan in the middle of a Wisconsin winter, an expensive haircut, and a laugh just a little too loud. He stood as we entered, extending a hand that sparkled with a watch probably worth more than my car. "Daniel, right? Heard a lot about you," he said. His grip was firm, confident, the kind of handshake that screamed boardrooms and bluffing. "You're with the government, right?" He glanced briefly at Allison, as if to make sure he was wording it delicately. I nodded. "Federal Financial Integrity Bureau. I specialize in corporate fraud investigations." There was a quick silence, broken only by Caroline's nervous laughter. "But not tonight, Daniel. We're not talking shop, remember," she chirped, ushering everyone toward the dinner table like a cruise director trying to prevent seasickness. "Let's keep it light." Dinner was a series of half-smiles and small talk, the clinking of cutlery barely covering the undercurrent of performance. Chase dominated the conversation with stories of business-class flights to Zurich, rounds of golf with clients in Scottsdale, and the time he almost bought property in Bali, but the timing just wasn't right. Everyone hung on his words like he was some kind of prophet, as if wealth gave his every anecdote deeper meaning. I stayed quiet for the most part, sipping my wine and answering questions with the kind of vague pleasantness they wanted from me. But I watched. The way Chase spoke in perfect rhythms, how he always had a pivot ready to bring the topic back to his success. It wasn't just confidence, it was rehearsed. There was a veneer to him, too polished, too controlled. And when I asked a seemingly innocent question, what kind of executive role he held, specifically, he gave me that same slick smile. "It's complicated," he said. "Lots of moving parts. I work with investor groups, help restructure underperforming assets. High-level stuff." I nodded again, saying nothing, but I saw the flicker of tension in his eyes. Caroline jumped in, of course, laughing too loudly. "You boys and your business speak. All I know is Chase is doing very well for himself." Brooke beamed. Allison shot me a look. One of those looks. The "I told you not to" kind. So I went back to my glass. Dessert came, and with it, more praise. "We need more young men like Chase in this world," Caroline said at one point, probably for my benefit. Chase laughed modestly, waving off the compliment, while slipping in another mention of his Porsche and how European models had better handling if you know what you're doing. The whole night was a stage, and I wasn't the lead. I wasn't even part of the cast. I was the guy behind the curtain, expected to clap at the right time and not say anything too real. I felt like a stranger in the middle of a pageant. No one wanted the truth. They wanted a show. And Chase? He knew exactly how to give it. Chase made his entrance the way you'd expect a man like him would, loud enough for everyone to hear, just late enough to be noticed. He walked in wearing a navy suit that probably had a European label stitched on the inside, his shirt unbuttoned just enough to suggest confidence without slipping into vulgarity, and on his wrist, a watch so bright it practically reflected the chandelier light across the room. His cologne arrived a full 2 seconds before he did. He smiled like he owned the house, kissed Caroline on both cheeks like he'd been raised on the French Riviera, and then clapped me on the shoulder like we were old college buddies. "There he is," he said, grinning, "the man of the hour. The government guy." Dinner had barely started, but the tone had already been set. The first course hadn't even hit the table before Chase started weaving himself into every conversation, dropping names and locations like breadcrumbs he expected us to follow with wide eyes and admiration. "We were just in Dubai last month," he said, slicing through a piece of brie with a knife that probably cost less than his pocket square. "Met with a few people from a sovereign fund out there. Nothing finalized, of course, but big things are in motion. You know how it is when you're playing in global markets, everything's a chessboard." He looked directly at me when he said it, flashing that same practiced smile. "Although I imagine it's a little different when you're, what do you do again, Daniel? Chasing tax cheats or something?" I didn't respond right away. Allison shifted slightly in her seat. Caroline laughed, sharp, performative. "He's with the Financial Bureau," she said, as if trying to elevate the tone of what I did. "A federal investigator." Chase nodded, mock serious. "Right. Of course. Important work. Someone's gotta keep track of the pennies." He chuckled at his own joke and turned to Brooke, who was already laughing, her eyes practically gleaming. "Bet this guy knows all the best paper trail tricks, huh? I better be careful tonight. Might find a wire under the table." No one defended me. Not Brooke, who leaned in closer to him like he was magnetic, not Caroline, who seemed thrilled to have him perform in her dining room, and not Allison, who looked down at her lap, pretending to smooth out an invisible wrinkle on her dress. I just nodded slowly and took a sip of water, not because I was thirsty but because it gave me something to do with my hands. The insults kept coming, each one dipped in humor, just light enough to be denied if challenged, but sharp enough to sting. "So, what do you drive, Daniel?" Chase asked during the second course. "Still got that, what is it? A Camry?" He exaggerated the name like it was a punchline. "Man, those things run forever, huh? Reliable. That's what matters, I guess." I looked at him, deadpan. "It gets me where I need to go." "I'll bet it does," he said with a smirk. "No point in spending on the flashy stuff when you're working a government gig. I mean, salary's decent, right? Benefits are solid. Retirement's what, 65? He winked at Caroline like we were sharing some private joke. "That pension must be sweet. Old school, but sweet." I stayed silent, chewing slowly, letting the sound of his voice blur into the clink of forks against china. Every time he spoke, it was as if he was trying to reshape the table's orbit, pulling everyone toward him, dragging their attention away from anything grounded in reality. He talked about property in Aspen, a yacht club membership he was thinking about, the time he almost met a sitting senator but had to cancel because his portfolio was on fire. Every story was bigger than the last, and each one was polished smooth by repetition. He turned to me again during the main course, after detailing his latest high-risk, high-reward venture in Singapore. "But hey," he said, "at least with your job, you get structure. That's gotta be nice. No surprises, no pressure. Just follow the rules, file the forms. Safe. Comfortable." He tilted his wine glass and smiled again, like he was admiring me for choosing a life of smallness. "Not everyone's built for chaos, right?" There was a beat of silence. I felt everyone's eyes on me, waiting to see how I'd respond. Allison shifted again, but still said nothing. Brooke let out another breathless laugh. Caroline topped off his glass like he'd just given a toast. I nodded once more, slow and neutral. "You're right," I said quietly. "Not everyone is." It wasn't about anger. I wasn't boiling inside. I was watching, recording, filing every little tick and detail away the way I always did when someone talked too much and said too little. The language, the posturing, the calculated carelessness. Chase wanted to play the part of the alpha, the big shot, the man above men. But to me, he looked more like a file waiting to be opened. As dessert was served, a flourless chocolate torte that Caroline claimed came from a boutique pâtisserie that only locals know, Chase launched into another story about his business dinners in Manhattan, rubbing shoulders with high-net-worth individuals, and how you'd be shocked what billionaires talk about when the cameras are off. He said it like he was part of their world, like he belonged there, and everyone at the table nodded along as if proximity alone made it true. I sat there quietly, tasting the bitterness of the chocolate, listening to the artificial smoothness in his voice, and wondering just how long he'd been rehearsing this act. The moment everything shifted didn't come with a bang or a dramatic pause, it came casually, wrapped in arrogance and poured out alongside a second glass of wine. Chase was leaning back in his chair, one arm draped comfortably behind Brooke, enjoying the room the way a performer enjoys applause, when Caroline asked him where exactly he worked, saying she loved being able to tell her friends these things. He didn't hesitate. He smiled, straightened his cuff, and said the name like it deserved respect. Stratosphere Consulting Group. I went still. Not figuratively, not emotionally, but physically, like someone had flipped a switch inside me and locked every muscle in place. The room kept moving around me, forks scraping plates, Brooke laughing softly, Allison taking a sip of wine, but all I could hear was that name echoing in my head. Stratosphere Consulting Group. 4 months. That's how long the file had been sitting on my desk. 4 months of forensic accounting, shell corporations, fake investment portfolios, and a trail of victims that skewed old enough to make my stomach turn. Retirees. Widows. People who thought they were securing their last years instead of funding someone else's Porsche. Chase, oblivious, kept talking. Yeah, Stratosphere's been incredible to me, he said, swirling his wine. Fast growth, aggressive strategy, but that's how you win. We don't babysit clients, we show them how real money works. He chuckled. I cleared $450 last year, not including bonuses. Not bad for someone who didn't want to rot behind a desk his whole life. Caroline's eyes widened. Brooke squeezed his arm like she'd just won something. Allison finally looked up at me, probably expecting to see irritation or embarrassment. What she saw instead made her frown. Because I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't smiling politely. I was looking directly at Chase, and for the first time all night, I wasn't seeing the showman. I was seeing the structure underneath the costume. He kept going, riding the high of his own voice. He talked about the condo upgrade they were planning, about how poor financial literacy was the reason people stayed poor, about how you couldn't save everyone and shouldn't try. Every sentence lined up perfectly with transcripts I'd already read, internal emails I'd already highlighted, recorded calls where the same language was used to justify draining life savings from people who trusted them. I set my fork down carefully, deliberately, and the sound cut through the room sharper than I expected. Stratosphere, I said, calmly, tasting the word now instead of hearing it. Chase turned toward me, still smiling, still confident. That's interesting. He raised an eyebrow. Yeah? Ever heard of us? I nodded slowly. Every day. There was a flicker there, quick and involuntary, gone almost before it appeared, but it was enough. His smile tightened. Guess we're bigger than I thought, he said lightly. Bigger isn't the word I'd use, I replied, keeping my voice level, professional, the same tone I used in interview rooms. The table went quiet, not abruptly, but cautiously, like everyone sensed a temperature change and didn't know why. Caroline opened her mouth, probably to redirect, but I continued before she could. I've been working a federal case involving Stratosphere Consulting Group for the past 4 months, I said, not raising my voice, not posturing, just stating a fact. $70 million. Pyramid structure. Target demographic skews elderly. Multiple shell entities. Funds rerouted through offshore accounts before disappearing entirely. Brooke's smile faltered. Chase laughed once, sharp and forced. That's not funny. I'm not joking, I said, finally meeting his eyes without blinking. And I'm not speaking hypothetically. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy. Allison's hand found my arm under the table, her grip uncertain. Caroline stared at Chase like she was waiting for him to correct me, to reassure her this was some misunderstanding. He didn't. He just stared back at me, his face carefully blank, his confidence recalculating. You might want to be careful, he said slowly. Throwing around accusations like that. I nodded again. That advice usually comes after someone checks whether they're already on a list. For the first time all night, Chase Whitman didn't have a story ready. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence linger just a moment longer, letting Chase feel the weight of it pressing in on all sides. His smirk was gone now, replaced with the cautious, twitchy focus of a man suddenly unsure of the room around him. I didn't raise my voice, didn't posture or make a scene. I just tilted my head slightly and asked the question plainly, like I would in any other interview, like I had 100 times before. So, Chase, I said, how exactly does Stratosphere Consulting Group make its money? Is it primarily through consulting fees, or is the compensation model more recruitment-based? The shift was immediate. Subtle, but clear. His spine straightened. His fingers twitched near his glass, but he didn't lift it. His eyes darted briefly toward Brooke, then Caroline, before landing back on me. Well, he began, stretching the word out like it was a placeholder while his brain scrambled for footing, we provide strategic advisory services to private investors looking to diversify. That's our main focus. Asset growth, portfolio guidance, wealth scaling. You know, helping people win. Right, I nodded, as if I were taking notes. But does that include compensation for recruiting new investors? Are team members incentivized to bring in others as part of their compensation plan? He opened his mouth, then closed it. It's a networked structure, he said eventually. We believe in growth through relationships. Financial empowerment is our mission. We help people build communities of wealth. That was all the confirmation I needed. I let his words hang in the air before gently setting down my wine glass. So it's a multi-level marketing structure, I said. And the compensation depends primarily on how many people you bring in under you, rather than the actual return on their investment. That's a simplistic way to put it, he said, the edge creeping into his voice now. You're reducing something complex into something it's not. I've reduced it exactly as it is, I said, quietly but firmly. Your firm's payment structure pays out bonuses to recruiters based on the amount of money new members put into investment pools that don't exist. The average return across your last 4 cohorts is negative. Less than 2% of participants earn back even half of their original input. Caroline opened her mouth, her fork frozen midair. Daniel, she said cautiously, maybe we don't need. I didn't even look at her. I kept my eyes on Chase. You know what I've always found interesting? I said. The language. Your internal training guides, relationship-based wealth building, upstream opportunity zones, accelerated growth units. Sounds impressive. Means nothing. All filler. And when you strip it all away, it's just a reshaped version of the same scheme we've seen since the 1970s. Only you were arrogant enough to dress it in better suits. Chase was still trying to smile, but the color in his face had changed. The tan seemed paler now, his jaw clenched tight under the weight of being cornered without warning. I pulled my phone from my jacket pocket, unlocked it, and scrolled without ceremony. We executed a subpoena on your firm's cloud server 3 weeks ago. A judge signed off after the 4th elderly victim filed a complaint. You didn't even bother encrypting the internal correspondence. I turned the phone toward him and tapped the screen once. On display was a screenshot of an internal email chain, Chase's name right there in bold. Dated 2 months ago. The subject line was bland, Q4 recruiter highlights. But the message was anything but. In the body, Chase was congratulating a mid-tier recruiter named Darren for securing a $110,000 growth input from a 76-year-old widow in Kenosha. She had liquidated her late husband's life insurance to maximize her legacy investment potential. The final line of the email was burned into my memory, get her to bring in a niece or nephew and she's golden. Make it happen. I didn't look at Chase as I held the phone up. I looked at Brooke. I wanted her to see it. I wanted all of them to see it. Chase didn't move. His eyes were locked on the screen like he could erase the words by staring hard enough. Brooke's hand dropped from his arm. Allison's grip on my forearm tightened. Caroline looked stunned, her carefully controlled face cracking in slow, visible degrees. You're misinterpreting that, Chase said finally, his voice lower now, the false polish peeling away. You don't understand the full picture. I understand exactly what it is, I said, slowly lowering the phone. You're a predator. You built your lifestyle off the backs of people who didn't know better, and you wrapped it in enough corporate double talk to make it sound like innovation. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. There were no buzzwords left. No names to drop. No vacations to mention. Just a silence that clung to the corners of the room and left everyone looking somewhere else. Anywhere else. The room fractured the moment I lowered my phone. It didn't explode, it cracked, slowly and painfully, like porcelain under pressure, the kind you can hear before you see. Brooke's breath caught first, sharp and wet, and then she was crying. Not soft, embarrassed tears, but the kind that come from something real breaking. Her napkin dropped from her lap to the floor, and she turned away from the table, her hands covering her mouth like she was trying to physically push the reality away. Chase didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone. His chest rose and fell fast, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the vein in his temple throb. He wasn't angry anymore, he was scared. Caroline reached for her wine like a lifeline. "This is absurd," she said, but the conviction was gone from her voice. "This is your interpretation, Daniel. You don't know what those emails mean. Maybe it's a misunderstanding, maybe this is something legal, but not criminal." I turned toward her, slow and deliberate. "Caroline, your daughter is dating a man who manipulates the elderly into emptying their savings accounts. The Porsche he drove here is leased under a Shell LLC registered in Nevada that no longer pays taxes. The penthouse he brags about? Rented month to month under an alias, real estate records confirm it. The clothing, the trips, the watches, all of it bought with dirty money skimmed off desperate people he convinced were investing in their future." Her lips parted like she wanted to speak again, but nothing came out. I could see her mind scrambling to rearrange the version of reality she'd worked so hard to curate, but no matter how she tried to reshape it, the center was caving in. Chase said nothing. He was blinking fast now, his hand hovering near his pocket like he was trying to decide whether to grab his phone or his keys or just disappear entirely. That was when Donald finally spoke. Allison's father had been mostly quiet all night, sitting at the end of the table like some old photograph of a patriarch who had long stopped caring about the show Caroline liked to put on. But now his voice cut through everything, low and direct. "Is it true?" he asked, not even looking at Chase, but staring down the length of the table at me. "You're saying this whole thing, his company, his money, everything, it's a scam?" I didn't flinch. "The investigation concluded last week. We're filing charges. Wire fraud, mail fraud, elder exploitation, conspiracy to commit securities fraud. Stratosphere is collapsing. Chase will be indicted. Probably within days. He knows that." Chase stood abruptly, the chair scraping violently against the floor, and for a second, it looked like he might say something, defend himself, deny it all, beg. But instead, he just muttered something unintelligible, turned on his heel, and walked out. The front door slammed a moment later. Brooke was up too, chasing after him in a burst of chaos, still crying, shouting his name as if that could pull him back or undo what she'd just learned. The sound of her heels echoing down the driveway was the last movement anyone made for a long time. The silence that followed was suffocating. Allison sat beside me, pale, unmoving. Caroline stared down at her half-eaten dessert like it might offer answers if she looked hard enough. Donald leaned back in his chair with a heavy breath, shaking his head slowly, muttering something under it that I couldn't hear. I reached for my fork and took another bite of the tort. Still warm. Rich. Bitter. No one said anything. No one could. The illusion had shattered completely, and all that was left were the broken pieces of a lie too beautiful to question until it was too late. The house was almost silent when the door closed behind Chase and Brooke, but the weight of everything that had just happened still hung in the air like a storm that hadn't finished. Dishes sat untouched, glasses half full, silverware scattered across linen napkins no one had bothered to fold. Caroline excused herself in a daze, murmuring something about needing to make a call, though I doubted she'd be speaking to anyone. Donald stood, nodded once in my direction without saying a word, and disappeared down the hallway. Allison remained beside me, unmoving, but I could feel the tension radiating off her like static. We didn't speak on the drive home. She stared out the passenger window the entire time, arms crossed, her silence sharp enough to cut. I didn't press. I knew it was coming, the confrontation, the reckoning, and I didn't intend to defuse it before she was ready to let it out. I'd learned by now that Allison didn't shout. She sharpened her words instead, carved them clean and slow. It came in the living room, after she dropped her bag by the door and turned to face me with something between disbelief and fury in her eyes. "You knew," she said. No preamble, no hesitation. "You knew all of that. You sat through dinner while he humiliated you. While we laughed at his jokes. While he mocked you. And you just let it happen?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't move toward her. I looked her in the eye and answered exactly as I had planned to if this moment ever came. "I let him reveal who he really is," I said. "And I let your family show me where I stand." Her face faltered for a moment, her mouth opening slightly like she wanted to argue, but she didn't. The silence that followed was louder than any shouting could have been. "I wasn't just watching him tonight," I continued. "I was watching you. Your mother. Brooke." The way everyone leaned in when he spoke, like proximity to him meant something. "I watched you look away every time he took a shot at me. And I stayed quiet because I needed you to see it for yourselves. Because if I'd spoken up any earlier, I'd have been the bitter government worker trying to drag down a success story. You needed to watch him collapse under his own weight. Allison stepped back slightly, her arms still crossed, her eyes glossy but unreadable. She wasn't used to seeing me like this, steady, sure, unmoved by her disappointment. I didn't know, she whispered finally. I didn't know it would go that far. You didn't want to know, I said. Because he looked like something better. Because he made your family feel like they were brushing up against wealth and status and everything they think matters. You let them treat me like an inconvenience. And you didn't stop them. She didn't try to deny it. She just stood there, breathing shallow, her expression a slow crumble of guilt and clarity. I didn't wait for more. I walked past her, picked up my coat, and left. The house was still ours, technically, but that night, I needed space to feel like mine. I spent the night at a hotel downtown. Nothing dramatic, nothing expensive. Just quiet. I didn't sleep much. I wasn't angry, anger fades too quickly. What I felt was colder than that. A hollowing. A realization of just how long I'd let myself be a background fixture in someone else's carefully curated life. She came the next morning. I opened the door to find her standing there, no makeup, hair pulled back, red eyes that told me she hadn't slept either. She didn't speak at first. She just looked at me like she wasn't sure she'd be allowed to. And then, finally, her voice cracked. I'm sorry. I didn't say anything. I let her speak. I saw it, she said. All of it. Last night? I saw who he was, but I also saw what I did. What I let happen. I let your silence become a shield for my comfort. I thought I was protecting you by telling you to behave, by smoothing things over, by trying to make you fit better. But really, I was just embarrassed by you because you weren't flashy. Because you didn't play the game. Because you were quiet and steady and didn't make the room spin. Her voice broke again. I wanted to believe his world was something worth chasing. That it meant we were better. That he was better. And when you didn't challenge him, I thought it proved something. But you were letting him hang himself the whole time. And I just stood there. I stepped aside and let her in. She didn't move right away, just stood on the threshold like she wasn't sure she deserved to come in. When she did, it was slow, quiet, careful. I can't take that night back, she said. But I don't want to be that person anymore. Not the woman who stays silent when the man she loves is being torn down for sport. Not someone who mistakes noise for strength. I sat down, and she followed. She reached for my hand, but I didn't take it at first. I need you to hear me, I said. I don't need a manager. I don't need someone to make me more palatable to people who only understand worth in car brands and dinner parties. I need a partner. Someone who has my back in the room, not just after we leave it. Because I saw what I was to you last night. And it wasn't that. Her eyes brimmed again. I know, she whispered. It won't happen again. I nodded slowly. Then we start over. But it starts with honesty. And with knowing the difference between performance and truth. She didn't argue. She just stayed there, holding my gaze like she finally saw the man sitting in front of her, not the job title, not the salary, but the person. And for the first time in a long time, I believed she really did. 2 weeks later, it all came to a head. It was a Tuesday morning when they picked him up. Chase Whitman was arrested outside the same penthouse he'd bragged about during that dinner, the one he never actually owned. He didn't go quietly. Of course he didn't. He wore sunglasses, tried to smile for the cameras like it was all a misunderstanding, tried to talk his way through it even as agents placed him in cuffs. But behind the designer coat and carefully rehearsed calm, the panic was visible. His lawyers couldn't spin this. Stratosphere Consulting Group was over. The indictments came fast. 6 other executives were named, each one facing federal charges: conspiracy, wire fraud, financial elder abuse. Their internal documents, messaging platforms, and transaction histories had built a case too tight to wiggle through. The pyramid had collapsed, and for the first time, the people at the bottom, the victims, weren't being left behind. A federal compensation program was activated, structured through seized assets and restitution funds. The 76-year-old woman from Kenosha got her money back. So did hundreds of others. It wouldn't undo the fear or the trust that had been broken, but it gave them something: justice, maybe, or at least the sense that someone had finally been looking out for them. When I was called to testify, I did it without hesitation. I sat in the courtroom and walked the jury through everything: how the model worked, how the recruiters were trained to target vulnerability, how success was measured by volume, not value. I showed the documents again, the emails, the payment trails, the polished manipulation masked as empowerment. Chase sat there the entire time, dressed in a gray suit that didn't quite fit, flanked by lawyers who no longer smiled. He didn't look at me once. I didn't speak to him. I didn't need to. The courtroom wasn't a place for pride or revenge. It was where the truth was finally louder than performance. And when the sentence came, 9 years in federal prison, he didn't flinch. He just stared straight ahead, empty. Like the show had finally ended, and he didn't know what to do without an audience. Allison was there in the gallery. She reached for my hand when I stepped down from the witness stand, and for a moment we sat there in silence, side by side, as the courtroom emptied. Then she turned to me, eyes soft, voice quiet. "I'm proud of you," she said. "Not because you exposed him. Not because you made them all see. I'm proud of you because this is what you do. You protect people. Even when no one's watching." That meant more than I expected. Not because I needed to hear it, but because for the first time in a long time, I believed she meant it without qualification. The weeks that followed didn't fix everything, but they changed things. Caroline, for one, changed. Slowly, uncomfortably, but it happened. She called me one afternoon and asked to meet for coffee. I agreed, not because I was eager, but because I wanted to know if it was real. She apologized. Not with tears or grand gestures, but with restraint, which, coming from her, meant more. She admitted that she had been blinded by Chase, by the illusion of security and status he brought to her table. She said she realized, too late, that she dismissed substance in favor of shine. I nodded, accepted her apology, and told her the only thing I cared about was how she treated Allison moving forward. She said she understood. Donald came to me quietly, not long after. He didn't say much at first, just asked if I had a few minutes. He brought a folder filled with financial documents, his accounts, some bonds, a few investments he hadn't reviewed in years. He asked me to look it over, to tell him if anything looked wrong. It was the first time he'd ever asked for my advice on anything, and I took my time with it. When I handed it back to him, he clapped me on the shoulder once and muttered, "Should have come to you sooner." That was enough. Even Brooke changed. Her world had cracked open that night, and for a while she disappeared into it, off social media, off everyone's radar. When I finally saw her again, she was quieter, humbler. She didn't pretend Chase hadn't hurt her. She admitted how much she'd bought into the fantasy. But she also said something I didn't expect. I thought confidence meant truth. Now I know better. We didn't talk long, but when she left, she thanked me. Not for the exposure or the justice, but for making her look closer at what she believed about people. That felt like a start. As for Allison and me, we moved forward carefully. There were no grand declarations or instant fixes. But she stayed beside me, not as a manager or a supporter trying to shape perception, but as someone who listened, who questioned, who stood her ground. We talked more. Not just about what had happened, but about why it had taken something so public to shake the walls we'd built around ourselves. Sometimes, justice isn't loud. Sometimes, it's not a gavel or a headline. Sometimes, it's quieter, the absence of pretense, the stillness after the noise fades, the way a person looks at you when they finally see you without the distortion of what they wanted you to be. And sometimes, that's enough. 6 months later, life didn't look glamorous, but it felt solid. Steady. Honest. The kind of life that didn't need polishing or performance to feel worthwhile. Allison and I had just bought a new Toyota, nothing flashy, no turbocharged engine or leather-trimmed interior packages, just a simple, dependable sedan in a muted silver finish. The kind of car that didn't need to be explained. It fit us, and more importantly, it fit the version of us we'd worked to rebuild. The bumper sticker was her idea. We were walking out of the dealership, paperwork still warm in our hands, when she pulled it from her purse and held it up with a smile that I hadn't seen in a long time, one that was proud, not performative. It read, "My husband protects the vulnerable. Ask me how." I raised an eyebrow and asked if she was serious. She nodded. Dead serious. I didn't argue. We stuck it on that same day. Now, when we pull into the driveway at Caroline and Donald's, it's the first thing people see. And for once, I don't feel like I have to explain myself to anyone when I step out of the car. Family dinners have shifted. There's still wine, still too many side dishes, still Caroline's obsession with perfect presentation, but the air is different now. I'm no longer the outsider at the table, the husband who got tolerated instead of heard. They ask about my cases. They ask how the bureau is doing. And when Caroline introduces me to friends or distant relatives who wander in for a Sunday meal, she says things like, "Daniel's with the FFIB. He took down that pyramid scheme. Remember that case on the news?" She says it like it matters. Donald, who once treated finance like a man's territory and my job like a footnote, now spends half his conversations warning his golf buddies about scams and phishing schemes. He'll nudge me across the table sometimes and ask, "Is this one real?" while holding up a screenshot of some sketchy ad or a too-good-to-be-true investment pitch. I look it over, nod, and tell him the truth, and he listens now. Brooke's different too. She still carries some of the weight from what happened, but she's quieter these days, more cautious, more inward. She started dating again, but it's not a parade of flashy guys anymore. She told me once, when we were both lingering in the kitchen after dinner, that she's looking for someone who listens first. Someone boring, maybe. Someone real. I didn't say much. Just handed her a plate to dry and let the silence do the work. Allison and I are better. Not perfect, not cinematic, just better. We talk more. She doesn't flinch when I speak plainly, and I don't retreat when the room turns uncomfortable. She stands beside me now, not in front of me trying to soften edges or package me for company. She knows who I am, and for the first time in years, I think she actually sees it as a strength. As for me, I'm still at the bureau. Still buried in reports and transaction audits and long, methodical case files that most people would fall asleep reading. I still drive the same routes to the same office. Still wear the same shirts that never make headlines. And I still sit across from people who think they've built something too complex to be understood, too layered to be unraveled. But I know better now. I've seen what happens when lies pile up high enough to look like confidence. I've seen how easy it is for people to fall for the shimmer, the surface, the performance. And I've seen what happens when you stay quiet long enough to let the truth catch up. Some days, the job feels thankless. It always has. There are no parades, no speeches, no glory. Just facts. Just people trying to stay afloat in a world where someone's always selling a shortcut. But I keep doing it. Because it matters. Because every file I close means someone didn't lose everything. Because sometimes, you don't need a badge or a stage to hold people accountable, you just need to show up, stay quiet, and pay attention. I used to think the room belonged to the loudest voice. Now I know different. Sometimes, the quiet man at the table is the only one who brought the receipts.